The scent hit me like a slap across the face. Rich, sultry, and completely foreign on my husband's collar. Midnight Rose by Chanel. I knew that perfume because I'd been shopping for it just last month at Nordstrom, testing it on my wrist before deciding it was too bold for a mother picking up her daughter from soccer practice. But here it was, clinging to Mark's shirt like an invisible confession. "How was your client meeting?" I asked, my voice steady despite the ice forming in my stomach as I took his jacket to hang in the closet. Mark barely looked up from his phone, already scrolling through emails with the dedication of a man building his empire. Long. Peterson's being difficult about the financing terms on the new inventory. Had to stay late going over numbers with the team. The team. That's what he called it now. Not Vanessa, his executive assistant who'd started working at Premier Auto Group 6 months ago. Not the recently divorced blonde who'd been all smiles and helpful suggestions at the company picnic, where I'd first smelled that same distinctive perfume. Just the team. I pressed my face into his shirt before tossing it into the hamper, breathing in that foreign sweetness that had no business being there. My husband of 9 years had never smelled like anything other than his usual cologne and the faint leather scent from the showroom. This was different. This was intimate. This was the kind of scent that transferred only through close contact. Standing in our walk-in closet in our beautiful Mediterranean home on Oakwood Drive, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet. Just crack. Like the first line appearing in a windshield, that you know will eventually spider across the entire surface. My name is Jessica Carter, and 3 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I'm 34, mother to 8-year-old Emma, and according to everyone in our social circle in Riverside's Maple Heights neighborhood, I'm living the dream. Beautiful house, successful husband climbing the corporate ladder at Premier Auto. Group, and enough time to volunteer at Emma's school and maintain our immaculate home. What nobody knows, including my husband, is that I'm not the stay-at-home mom they think I am. I'm not the domestic goddess who finds fulfillment in PTA meetings and organizing playdates. I'm Jessica Carter, former founder of Carter Digital Security, a cybersecurity specialist who walked away from a 6-figure business to raise our daughter. Walked away, not shut down. There's a significant difference, though Mark has never bothered to ask about the details. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The perfume incident was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously dismissed as the natural evolution of a busy marriage. The way Mark's phone lived face down on every surface. The sudden interest in working out, resulting in a gym membership he'd never mentioned discussing. The late nights that were becoming more frequent, always explained with corporate buzzwords about inventory management and client retention strategies. But it was Thursday evening when everything shifted from suspicion to certainty. Mark had texted around 4 saying he'd be late again. Something about a last-minute conference call with the district managers about quarterly projections. I'd already picked up Emma from her after-school program and was helping her with homework when my phone buzzed with a photo from my friend Rachel Thompson. Rachel and I had been roommates at UC Riverside, and she'd gone on to become a private investigator specializing in insurance fraud. She had a habit of sending random photos from around town, usually accompanied by commentary about the dramatic lives of strangers. This photo was taken from the parking lot of the Marriott Hotel on Business Park Drive, showing a familiar silver BMW parked next to a red Honda Civic. "Spotted your husband's car at the Marriott," her text read. Probably another one of those business dinners he's always talking about. Lucky you, married to Mr. Corporate Success. The message was innocent enough. Rachel had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But I knew that BMW's license plate by heart, and I knew Mark had told me he was at the office for a conference call, not at a hotel for a business dinner. More importantly, I recognized the red Honda Civic parked beside it from the Premier Auto Group employee parking lot. I'd seen it there during my occasional visits to drop off lunch or attend company events. It belonged to Vanessa Mills. I stared at the photo until the screen went dark, then stared at my own reflection in the black glass. Emma was chattering about her science project in the background, something about volcanoes and chemical reactions, but her voice seemed to be coming from underwater. My husband was at a hotel with his secretary, and I was sitting at our kitchen island helping our daughter with homework, like nothing had changed. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No tears, no rage, no desperate urge to call Mark and demand explanations. Instead, I felt the same methodical focus that used to take over when I was working on a particularly complex security breach for a client. The emotional noise faded into background static, leaving only clarity and purpose. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma's voice cut through my thoughts. She was looking at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of myself at her age, already learning to read the emotions adults tried to hide. "I'm perfect, sweetheart," I said, and meant it. "Tell me more about this volcano project. What kind of chemical reaction are you trying to create?" That night, after Mark came home smelling like hotel soap and explaining about the challenging conference call that had required an impromptu dinner meeting, I lay awake listening to his breathing and planning my next moves. The years of forced domesticity had made me soft around the edges, had convinced everyone, including myself, that I'd transformed into someone whose greatest concern was whether the organic vegetables at Whole Foods were actually worth the premium price. But lying there in the dark, I remembered who I used to be. I remembered the thrill of tracing digital breadcrumbs through complex networks, the satisfaction of uncovering carefully hidden information, the quiet power that came from knowing more than anyone expected me to know. I'd been one of the best cybersecurity specialists in Southern California before Emma was born, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to government agencies dealing with sensitive data breaches. I'd stepped away from that world gradually, telling myself it was temporary, that I'd return once Emma was older. Mark had been supportive in theory, though he'd never really understood what I did for a living. To him, I'd always been the smart computer girl he'd met in college, useful for fixing his laptop and setting up his home network, but not someone whose professional expertise extended into the kind of high-stakes digital forensics that could topple corporations. Over the years, as his career in automotive sales flourished and his income grew, my professional identity had become increasingly abstract. When people asked what I did, I'd started saying I was between projects, then that I was focusing on family, and finally that I was a stay-at-home mom. The transition had been so gradual that I'd barely noticed it happening. Mark certainly hadn't questioned it. Having a wife who was completely financially dependent on him fit perfectly with his vision of success. What Mark didn't know was that Carter Digital Security still existed. Not actively, but legally and financially intact. I'd never formally dissolved the business, had maintained the necessary licenses and certifications, had even taken on the occasional consulting project. When a former client needed specialized help they couldn't get elsewhere. The income from these sporadic jobs went into a separate account that I'd established years ago for business expenses. Over time, that account had grown into something substantial, a safety net that I'd never mentioned because it had never seemed relevant to our shared financial planning. Mark handled our household finances with the same confidence he brought to everything else, and I'd been content to let him manage the big picture while I focused on Emma and the daily logistics of our life. He knew about my regular checking account, the credit cards we shared, the joint savings account where we kept our emergency fund. He had no idea about the business account that had been quietly accumulating income and interest for years, growing into a resource that could fund whatever came next. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work and Emma was safely at school before I opened my laptop and began reacquainting myself with tools I hadn't used in months. My home office occupied a small room at the back of the house, officially designated as my crafting space, where I supposedly worked on scrapbooks and organized Emma's school photos. In reality, it contained everything I needed to conduct the kind of digital investigation that had once been my specialty. I started with the basics, accessing our shared cell phone account to review Mark's usage patterns. The official call logs showed exactly what I expected to find: an increase in calls to and from Vanessa's number over the past 2 months, with several lasting longer than any business conversation should reasonably require. More interesting were the deleted messages, which most people assumed disappeared completely, but actually left digital traces for anyone who knew where to look. Mark's laptop was even more revealing. He'd gotten careless about security, probably because he'd forgotten that his wife had once made a living exposing exactly this kind of digital vulnerability. His browser history showed regular visits to hotel websites, restaurant reservation systems, and online jewelry stores. The cached data revealed searches for discreet hotels near Riverside, best anniversary gifts, and how to permanently delete text messages. But the real treasure trove was his secondary email account, the one he'd created using a variation of his name that he probably thought was clever. Mark C. Business, 2024 @gmail. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Com contained 6 weeks of correspondence that painted a detailed picture of an affair that had started as flirtation and evolved into something much more serious. The messages began professionally enough, discussions about scheduling and client management, but quickly progressed into personal territory. "You smell incredible today," read one message from Mark to Vanessa. "I can't stop thinking about that perfume you wear." "It's Midnight Rose," she'd replied. "I'm glad you like it. I wore it especially for you." The conversation threads that followed were increasingly intimate, full of references to lunch meetings that weren't on any company calendar and evening encounters that had nothing to do with automotive sales. By the 3rd week, they were coordinating hotel reservations and discussing their feelings for each other in terms that made clear this wasn't just physical attraction. "I never expected this to happen," Mark had written in a message dated just 5 days ago. "But being with you makes me realize what's been missing from my marriage. Jessica is a good mother and she keeps the house running smoothly, but we don't connect anymore. We don't have the kind of chemistry that you and I share." I read that message 3 times before the words fully registered. Jessica is a good mother, and she keeps the house running smoothly. 9 years of marriage, a daughter we'd created, together, a life we'd built from nothing, and that's how he summarized my value. A competent housekeeper who happened to have given birth to his child. The most recent messages were discussing plans for the upcoming Premier Auto Group annual charity gala, an elegant affair held at the Riverside Country Club where Mark was expected to be recognized for his sales achievements and possibly announced as the new district manager. Vanessa would be attending as part of the support staff, helping to coordinate the evening's events. Mark was looking forward to seeing her in the new dress she'd bought for the occasion, paid for with a credit card. I was now realizing he'd been using for purposes that had nothing to do with our household expenses. "I can't wait to dance with you," he'd written. "Even if we have to be discreet with Jessica there. Even if we have to be discreet with Jessica there." The phrasing made it clear that my presence at my husband's professional triumph was an inconvenience, to be managed rather than a celebration to be shared. I was the obstacle standing between Mark and his perfect evening with his perfect new woman, wearing her perfect new dress that he'd purchased with money from our shared accounts. I closed the laptop and sat in my crafting room surrounded by the evidence of my husband's betrayal, feeling something settle into place that had been loose and uncertain for weeks. The crack in my chest had finished its journey across the surface, and now the pieces were falling away to reveal something harder and more focused underneath. Mark thought he was having a discreet affair with a woman who appreciated him in ways his boring housewife never could. Vanessa thought she was building a relationship with a successful man who would eventually leave his domestic situation for something more exciting. Both of them had made the same crucial error in judgment. They'd underestimated me completely. I'd spent years being the supportive wife, the attentive mother, the invisible woman who made everyone else's life run smoothly. I'd been so good at playing that role that I'd almost convinced myself it was who I really was. But sitting in my office, surrounded by the digital evidence of their arrogance and deception, I remembered exactly who Jessica Carter had been before she'd learned to make herself small. The charity gala was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to gather everything I needed, to document every detail of their affair, to prepare for the moment when Mark would stand up in front of his colleagues and superiors to accept recognition for his professional achievements while his wife smiled supportively from the audience. Except this time, his wife would be armed with information that would change everything. This time, the woman they'd dismissed as irrelevant would remind them both that underestimating people was a dangerous game to play. I opened my laptop again and began making a list of everything I needed to accomplish before the gala. Mark and Vanessa had been so careful to hide their affair from the world, but they'd been sloppy about hiding it from someone with my particular skill set. That sloppiness was going to cost them everything. The woman who kept the house running smoothly was about to show them both what she was really capable of when she decided to stop being accommodating. The following morning brought the kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night spent cataloging betrayal. I stood in my kitchen at 6:30, making Emma's lunch with mechanical precision while Mark showered upstairs, humming some song I didn't recognize. The normalcy of it all felt surreal, like watching actors perform a play about someone else's life. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich, apple slices, string cheese, juice box. The same lunch I'd been making for 3 years, assembled by hands that now trembled slightly with suppressed rage. Emma bounded down the stairs in her school uniform, backpack bouncing against her shoulders, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to change forever. At 8 years old, she still believed in the fundamental stability of families, still trusted that parents were honest with each other and that love meant what it claimed to mean. Watching her settle at the breakfast table with her usual chatter about upcoming spelling tests and playground drama, I felt something fierce and protective surge through my chest. "Mom, you look tired," she observed with the startling perceptiveness that children sometimes display. "Did you have trouble sleeping again?" Again. Even my daughter had noticed the restless nights that had been accumulating over the past month, though I'd attributed them to stress about household management and volunteer commitments rather than the subconscious recognition that something was fundamentally wrong in my marriage. "Just thinking about boring grown-up stuff," I told her, smoothing her dark hair away from her face. "Nothing for you to worry about." Mark appeared in the kitchen doorway, adjusting his tie with the confident efficiency of a man whose biggest concern was which promotional strategy would most effectively move luxury sedans off the lot. He looked handsome in his navy suit, I had to admit. The same easy smile that had attracted me in college, the same broad shoulders that had made me feel protected during our early years together. But now I knew that those shoulders had been pressed against someone else, that those hands had been touching skin that wasn't mine, that the mouth currently kissing Emma goodbye had been whispering endearments to another woman. "Big day today," he announced, accepting the travel mug of coffee I handed him without meeting my eyes. "District meeting about the promotion timeline. Could be good news by the end of the week." District manager, the position he'd been pursuing for 2 years, the culmination of everything he'd worked toward since joining Premier Auto Group. The promotion would mean more money, more responsibility, more prestige within the automotive industry in Southern California. It would also mean more travel, more late nights, more opportunities to expand whatever he had going with Vanessa into something even more elaborate. "That's wonderful," I said, my voice warm with the practiced enthusiasm of a supportive wife. "I'm sure they'll recognize everything you've accomplished." He finally looked at me then, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe? Or the shadow of the man who'd once valued my opinion enough to ask for it. But the expression passed so quickly I might have imagined. You'll be okay getting Emma to soccer practice? I might be late again. Of course, I replied, though we both knew I'd been handling Emma's entire schedule for months without requiring his input or assistance. I'll take care of everything. After they both left, I found myself standing in the sudden silence of our empty house, surrounded by the physical evidence of our shared life. Wedding photos on the mantelpiece, showing a younger version of myself, gazing adoringly at a younger Mark, who seemed genuinely happy to have found me. Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator, proud displays of crayon drawings that always included 3 stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and Me. The throw pillows I'd chosen to complement the leather couch Mark had insisted we needed. Expensive, enough to signal success, but comfortable enough for family movie nights. All of it felt like archaeology now. Artifacts from a civilization that had already collapsed without my realizing it. I walked through the rooms methodically, seeing everything with fresh eyes, cataloging the slow erosion of partnership that I'd somehow failed to notice while it was happening. The family computer in the living room, where Mark used to ask for my help with technical problems, but now guarded his passwords like state secrets. The kitchen island where we'd once planned vacations and discussed dreams, but where conversations had gradually narrowed to logistics and scheduling. The bedroom where physical intimacy had become perfunctory and infrequent, explained away by work stress and busy schedules, rather than the more obvious reality that his attention was being directed elsewhere. I ended up in my home office, surrounded by the remnants of my former professional identity, awards from the California Cybersecurity Association, certificates from advanced training programs, letters of recommendation from clients whose complex problems I'd solved with elegant technical solutions, physical proof that I'd once been respected for my expertise, sought out for my specialized knowledge, valued for contributions that extended far beyond domestic management. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I found the business cards I'd had printed 7 years ago. Jessica Carter, principal consultant, Carter Digital Security, clean typography, professional layout, contact information for a woman who'd commanded respect in a male-dominated industry. I traced the embossed letters with my fingertip, remembering the confidence I'd felt handing these cards to potential clients, the satisfaction of solving problems that had stumped other professionals. When had I stopped thinking of myself as that person? When had I internalized the transformation from cybersecurity specialist to domestic support system? The change had been so gradual, so wrapped in the reasonable language of family priorities and financial practicality, that I'd never consciously chosen to give up my identity. I'd simply allowed it to be eroded, one small accommodation at a time. Mark had never explicitly asked me to quit working. Instead, he'd made increasingly elaborate displays of how much he needed my support for his own career advancement. Late nights when he'd requested help preparing presentations, weekend mornings when he'd wanted to strategize about client relationships, family events where my presence was essential for maintaining his image as a successful family man. Each request had seemed reasonable in isolation, but collectively they'd created a system where his professional needs always took precedence over mine. When Emma was born, the transition to full-time domesticity had felt natural, even empowering. I was choosing to prioritize my family, making a conscious decision to step back from paid work in order to provide the kind of attentive parenting that would give our daughter the best possible foundation. Mark had been enthusiastic about this arrangement, frequently telling friends and colleagues how lucky he felt to have a wife who was willing to sacrifice her career for their family's well-being. But Emma was 8 now, fully established in school, and extracurricular activities, perfectly capable of thriving with less intensive parental supervision. Several times over the past 2 years, I'd mentioned the possibility of returning to consulting work, taking on projects that would allow me to rebuild my professional network while maintaining flexibility for family obligations. Mark had always found reasons why the timing wasn't quite right. His own career was at a crucial juncture, Emma needed stability during important developmental phases. The financial benefits wouldn't justify the disruption to our established routines. Looking back now, I could see the pattern clearly. Mark had become comfortable with a dynamic where my entire existence revolved around supporting his success. A wife who was financially dependent, professionally isolated, and socially defined primarily through her relationship to him. The perfect arrangement for a man who wanted absolute freedom to pursue whatever opportunities presented themselves, secure in the knowledge that his domestic situation would remain stable regardless of his behavior. Vanessa Mills represented everything I'd been systematically discouraged from being. Professionally ambitious, financially independent, socially confident, romantically available. She was the woman Mark could pursue without threatening his established lifestyle, because she wasn't demanding fundamental changes to his circumstances. She was enhancement, not replacement, adventure, not responsibility. I spent the afternoon methodically reviewing every piece of digital evidence I'd collected, organizing it into categories that would be useful for legal proceedings. Financial records showing unauthorized use of shared credit cards for romantic purposes. Communication. Logs documenting the development of an intimate relationship during work hours. Location data proving deception about whereabouts and activities. Travel receipts for hotel stays that corresponded to supposed business meetings. The paper trail was comprehensive enough to support fraud charges if I chose to pursue them. More importantly, it painted a clear picture of systematic deception that had been ongoing for months, possibly longer. Mark hadn't stumbled into this affair accidentally or impulsively. He'd planned it, funded it with family resources, and lied consistently to maintain it while preserving the stability of his home life. By evening, I'd compiled enough evidence to destroy both their careers and expose the affair to everyone in their professional and social circles. But as I reviewed the materials one more time, I realized that documentation was only the beginning. Public exposure would bring temporary satisfaction, but it wouldn't address the deeper problem of how I'd allowed myself to become so invisible that my own husband felt comfortable conducting an elaborate betrayal while living in the same house. The woman who'd built Carter Digital Security hadn't been invisible. She'd been formidable, respected, financially independent, intellectually engaged with challenging problems that required sophisticated solutions. She'd commanded rooms full of corporate executives and government officials, had testified as an expert witness in federal court cases, had been quoted in trade publications as an authority on emerging cybersecurity threats. That woman would never have tolerated being dismissed as someone who kept the house running smoothly. That woman would have recognized the warning signs of infidelity months earlier and addressed them directly rather than making excuses for her husband's increasingly suspicious behavior. That woman would have maintained her own financial independence and professional network, making her immune to the kind of manipulation that depended on isolation and economic vulnerability. The question now was whether I could become her again. Not just for the purpose of exposing Mark's affair, but for the larger project of reclaiming a life that reflected my actual capabilities rather than someone else's convenience. I opened a new browser window and began researching the current state of the cybersecurity industry in Southern California. The field had evolved significantly during my years of domestic focus, with new threats and new technologies creating opportunities for specialists who could adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Several of my former clients had expanded their operations or moved into new markets, potentially creating demand for the kind of consulting services I'd once provided. More interesting was the growing recognition of digital forensics as a specialized discipline within the broader cybersecurity field. Divorce attorneys were increasingly relying on electronic evidence to support claims of financial infidelity and asset concealment. Corporate investigations required experts who could trace digital communications and recover deleted data. Insurance companies needed specialists who could document fraud attempts that relied on sophisticated technological deception. All of these developments had occurred while I was making school lunches and organizing playdates, assuming that my professional expertise was becoming obsolete through disuse. Instead, the market for my particular skills had expanded dramatically, creating opportunities that hadn't existed when Emma was born. I spent 2 hours updating my knowledge of industry standards and certification requirements, confirming that my existing credentials remained valid, and identifying additional training that would strengthen my qualifications for current market demands. The technical skills came flooding back as I navigated through professional databases and regulatory websites. Muscle memory of complex analytical processes that had never really disappeared despite years of dormancy. By the time Mark returned home that evening, humming the same unfamiliar song and reeking of hotel soap beneath his hastily reapplied cologne, I'd already begun the process of professional reemergence. Not as revenge against his betrayal, though. That would certainly be a satisfying side effect, but as reclamation of an identity that had been temporarily submerged but never actually destroyed. "How was Emma's soccer practice?" he asked, settling onto the couch with his usual assumption that I'd handled all child-related responsibilities without requiring his involvement. "Excellent," I replied. "She scored 2 goals and made some great defensive plays. Coach Martinez thinks she has real potential." I didn't mention that I'd spent most of the practice researching business incorporation requirements and calculating the startup costs for reestablishing Carter Digital Security. As an active consulting firm, I didn't mention that I'd scheduled a meeting with my former business attorney for next week to discuss partnership opportunities and client development strategies. I didn't mention that several of my former colleagues had responded enthusiastically to carefully worded emails about potential collaboration on upcoming projects. Mark didn't ask for additional details about Emma's performance or show interest in the coach's assessment of her athletic development. He was already scrolling through his phone, probably checking messages from Vanessa or reviewing tomorrow's schedule of supposed business obligations that would actually be opportunities for continued deception. "I might be traveling more in the coming months," he announced without looking up from his screen. "If the promotion comes through, there'll be district meetings in Los Angeles and San Diego, overnight trips for regional conferences." More lies, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd grown comfortable with deception. Mark had no idea that I'd already accessed his work calendar and confirmed that no such travel requirements existed for district managers. He was creating fictional business obligations to cover extended romantic opportunities, confident that his trusting wife would never question the professional demands that kept him away from home. "That sounds like a great opportunity for career advancement," I said, my voice warm with the same supportive enthusiasm I'd been providing for years. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly here while you're building your success." He finally looked up, perhaps catching something in my tone that didn't quite align with my words. For a moment, I thought he might actually engage with me, might ask about my day, or express curiosity about my thoughts and feelings. But the moment passed, and he returned to his phone with the distracted attention of someone whose emotional investment was directed elsewhere. That night, I lay awake planning the systematic reconstruction of my professional identity while listening to Mark's peaceful breathing beside me. He was sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of someone who believed he'd successfully compartmentalized his life, keeping his marital obligations and romantic adventures in separate categories that would never intersect. But Mark had made a crucial error in his calculations. He'd assumed that the woman lying next to him was exactly who she appeared to be, a domestic creature whose world revolved entirely around his needs and preferences. He'd forgotten that Jessica Carter had once been formidable enough to build a successful business in a competitive industry, clever enough to solve complex problems that defeated other professionals, resourceful enough to command respect from clients who trusted her with their most sensitive security concerns. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reminding him exactly who he'd chosen to betray. Not just a wife and mother, but a woman whose particular expertise made her uniquely qualified to uncover secrets that people preferred to keep hidden. The charity gala was still 2 weeks away, but I was no longer waiting for that event to begin my response to Mark's deception. The response had already begun the moment I'd recognized Vanessa's perfume on his collar. Everything since then had been preparation for a campaign that would be as systematic and thorough as any cybersecurity audit I'd ever conducted. Mark and Vanessa had been careful to hide their affair from their colleagues and social circle, but they'd been careless about hiding it from someone with my particular qualifications. That carelessness was about to become the foundation for consequences they'd never imagined possible. The woman who kept the house running smoothly was about to show them both what happened when you underestimated someone whose professional expertise included exposing exactly the kind of secrets they thought they were clever enough to hide. The investigation began in earnest on a Tuesday morning, while Mark was presenting quarterly sales figures to his management team, and Emma was safely ensconced in her third-grade classroom learning about state capitals. I'd waited until the house was completely empty before accessing the advanced surveillance equipment I'd kept stored in labeled boxes in our garage, disguised among Emma's outgrown toys and seasonal decorations. Most people assume that digital forensics requires expensive, specialized equipment available only to law enforcement or major corporations. The reality is that consumer technology has advanced to the point where anyone with the right knowledge can conduct sophisticated electronic surveillance using tools readily available online. The key isn't access to equipment, but understanding how to use common devices in ways their manufacturers never intended. I started with Mark's laptop, the one he'd been using for what he thought were secure communications with Vanessa. While he'd changed his passwords and deleted obvious evidence, he'd failed to account for the fact that modern computers create dozens of hidden files and cache data every time they're used. These digital breadcrumbs remain accessible to anyone who knows where to look, forming a comprehensive record of user activity that most people never realize exists. The browser cache revealed detailed information about his online activities over the past 6 months, including searches for romantic restaurants in nearby cities, reservation websites for upscale hotels, and online jewelry stores specializing in anniversary gifts. More damaging were the searches for articles about maintaining extramarital relationships, including specific queries about how to delete text messages permanently and covering affair expenses without spouse noticing. His email recovery revealed multiple accounts I'd never known existed, each serving a different purpose in his elaborate deception network. The primary secret account contained his correspondence with Vanessa, but secondary accounts were used for hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, and online purchases that never appeared on our shared credit card statements. Mark had been far more systematic about concealing his activities than I'd initially realized. The financial investigation required accessing systems that were technically outside my authorized user privileges, but my cybersecurity background had taught me that most people use predictable password patterns based on personal information. Mark's banking passwords followed the same formula he'd always used, variations of his birth year combined with Emma's name or initials. Within 2 hours, I had complete access to accounts he'd assumed were private. What I discovered was financial infidelity on a scale that dwarfed my initial estimates. Over the past 4 months, Mark had systematically diverted money from our joint accounts into personal spending that had nothing to do with household expenses or family needs. Hotel charges totaling over $3,000, restaurant bills, for intimate dinners that cost more than our typical weekly grocery budget, jewelry purchases from Tiffany and David Yurman that had never appeared in our home. Most disturbing was a pattern of cash withdrawals in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic bank notifications. Mark had been strategically depleting our savings while maintaining the appearance of normal spending patterns. Confident that I wasn't monitoring our accounts closely enough to notice the gradual reduction in our financial security. But the real revelation came when I accessed the GPS tracking system built into his company BMW. Modern vehicles collect detailed location data that most drivers never think about, creating a comprehensive record of everywhere the car has traveled. Mark's movement patterns over the past 2 months painted a clear picture of deception that extended far beyond occasional hotel visits. 3 afternoons each week, his car was parked at the Marriott Hotel during hours when he'd claimed to be conducting client meetings at the dealership. 2 evenings each week, he'd driven to upscale restaurants in neighboring cities, far from anywhere our friends or colleagues might accidentally encounter him. Several weekend mornings, while claiming to be playing golf with colleagues, he'd actually been at a spa resort 40 miles away, where he and Vanessa had apparently established a regular romantic routine. The location data also revealed something I hadn't expected. Mark's deception extended beyond his relationship with Vanessa. His car had been parked outside a downtown attorney's office on 3 separate occasions over the past month. Visits that coincided with searches on his computer for uncontested divorce procedures and asset protection in California divorce law. Mark wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to end our marriage, but he was doing it strategically, positioning himself to minimize financial consequences while maximizing his freedom to pursue whatever future he'd envisioned with Vanessa. The romantic hotel visits and expensive dinners weren't just evidence of infidelity. They were test runs for a lifestyle he intended to adopt permanently once he'd extricated himself from his current domestic obligations. I printed out every piece of evidence methodically, creating physical backup copies of digital files that could potentially be deleted or corrupted if Mark discovered my investigation. The documentation filled 2 thick binders: financial records, communication logs, location data, browser histories, and email correspondence that collectively told the story of a man who'd been living a double life with remarkable sophistication. But evidence collection was only the first phase of my investigation. Understanding the full scope of Mark's deception required information about Vanessa's role in their affair and her own motivations for pursuing a relationship with a married man. This meant expanding my surveillance beyond Mark's activities to include monitoring the woman who'd become his primary emotional investment. Vanessa Mills had made herself vulnerable to digital investigation in ways that Mark had managed to avoid. Her social media presence was extensive and poorly secured, providing detailed information about her personal life, financial situation, and romantic history. Her Instagram account showed a pattern of expensive lifestyle choices that couldn't possibly be supported by an executive assistant's salary, including designer clothing, frequent spa treatments, and weekend trips to luxury resorts. More revealing were her posts about relationship status and personal goals. Over the past 6 months, she'd shared increasingly frequent content about deserving better and refusing to settle for less than I'm worth. Her comments on articles about successful couples often included observations about the importance of ambition and financial security in romantic partnerships. She'd also shared several articles about the challenges faced by single women in expensive California markets, suggesting that her interest in Mark might be motivated by practical considerations as well as emotional attraction. Her financial situation, accessible through public records and social media posts, painted the picture of someone living beyond her means and accumulating debt despite steady employment. Credit monitoring services showed multiple retail credit cards with balances near their limits, student loan payments that consumed a significant portion of her income, and a car loan for a vehicle that seemed designed more for appearance than practicality. Vanessa's romantic history, documented through her social media activity and online dating profiles that she'd failed to deactivate, revealed a pattern of relationships with older, financially established men. Her previous boyfriend had been a real estate developer 15 years her senior. Before him, she'd dated a restaurant owner who'd helped her establish connections in Riverside's social scene. Mark represented a continuation of this pattern rather than a departure from it. Most illuminating were the private messages between Vanessa and her closest friend, accessible through a shared cloud storage account that used the same password as her Instagram account. These conversations revealed the calculated nature of her pursuit of Mark and her specific goals for their relationship. "He's exactly what I've been looking for," she'd written to her friend 3 months ago. "Successful, generous, and ready. For something more exciting than what he has at home. His wife is completely clueless about what he needs emotionally." "Are you sure he's serious about leaving her?" her friend had responded. "Married men always say they're going to leave." Their wives. "This is different," Vanessa had replied. "He's already talking about what we could build together once he's free. He just needs to handle things strategically so the divorce doesn't destroy his financial position. I'm willing to be patient as long as I know we're working towards something real." The exchange continued with detailed discussions about Vanessa's timeline expectations and her strategies for maintaining Mark's interest while he navigated the complexities of ending his marriage. She'd researched divorce procedures in California, had identified attorneys who specialized in protecting assets during marital dissolution, and had even looked into real estate options for where she and Mark might live together once his domestic situation was resolved. Far from being a spontaneous romantic attachment, Vanessa's relationship with Mark was a carefully planned campaign designed to secure the kind of financial stability and social status that her own career trajectory couldn't provide. She'd identified a vulnerable married man, had systematically positioned herself as an alternative to his current situation, and was actively participating in planning the destruction of his family in order to achieve her personal goals. Armed with this comprehensive understanding of both participants in the affair, I began the second phase of my investigation, documenting their activities in real time to gather evidence that would be useful for legal proceedings. This required more sophisticated surveillance techniques, including the strategic placement of recording devices and the monitoring of their communications as they occurred. The technical challenge was significant, but not beyond my capabilities. Modern surveillance equipment has become remarkably compact and sophisticated, allowing for the kind of comprehensive monitoring that was previously available only to professional investigators. Wireless cameras smaller than shirt buttons could provide video documentation of meetings and encounters. Digital voice recorders could capture conversations from significant distances. GPS tracking devices could provide real-time location data for both vehicles. The legal implications were more complex. California law requires consent from at least one party for audio recordings of private conversations, which meant I couldn't legally document their private discussions unless I was present. However, video surveillance in public places was permissible, and recording conversations that occurred in my own home fell within my rights as a property owner. More importantly, financial records and digital communications were considered marital property accessible to both spouses during marriage, which meant my documentation of Mark's electronic activities was legally defensible, even if he hadn't provided explicit permission. The evidence I'd collected could be used in divorce proceedings without constitutional challenges, providing the foundation for claims of financial infidelity and breach of marital obligations. Over the next week, I established a comprehensive surveillance network that allowed me to monitor both Mark and Vanessa's activities without their knowledge. Cameras in strategic locations around our home documented Mark's behavior when he thought he was unobserved. Tracking devices on his car provided real-time location data that I could cross-reference with his claimed schedule. Software installed on his laptop captured screenshots at regular intervals, creating a visual record of his online activities. The results exceeded my expectations in terms of both volume and specificity. Mark's deception was even more elaborate than I'd initially realized, extending into areas of our shared life that I'd never thought to question. He'd been manipulating his work schedule to create additional opportunities for time with Vanessa, had been using business contacts to establish alibis for romantic encounters, and had been systematically lying about family obligations to excuse his absences from home. But the most significant discovery came from monitoring their communications in real time as their relationship evolved. Mark and Vanessa had moved beyond romantic escapism into practical planning for a shared future that explicitly excluded Emma and me from consideration. They'd discussed real estate options for a new home they planned to purchase together, had researched private schools for any children they might have, and had even opened a joint savings account to accumulate funds for their eventual cohabitation. Mark wasn't just cheating on our marriage. He was actively planning to replace our family with a new domestic arrangement that would provide him with the same stability and support he currently enjoyed, but with a partner who appreciated his success more enthusiastically than his current wife. Vanessa represented an upgrade rather than a departure, offering the same benefits of marriage but with fewer complications and greater gratitude. The timeline they'd established was aggressive but carefully structured. Mark planned to initiate divorce proceedings immediately after receiving his promotion to district manager, using his enhanced income and professional status to negotiate favorable terms for asset division and custody arrangements. He and Vanessa had calculated that his increased earning potential would allow them to maintain a comfortable lifestyle even after paying spousal support and child support, especially since they assumed I would remain financially dependent and professionally inactive. Their strategy depended entirely on my continued compliance with the role I'd been playing for years. The accommodating wife who prioritized everyone else's needs above her own, who avoided conflict in favor of stability, who lacked the resources or connections to mount effective resistance to their plans. They'd built their entire future on the assumption that Jessica Carter would remain exactly who she'd appeared to be for the past several years. That assumption was about to prove catastrophically incorrect. While Mark and Vanessa had been planning their romantic future, I'd been rebuilding the professional network and technical capabilities that they'd forgotten I possessed. While they'd been documenting their affair through careless digital communications, I'd been documenting their affair through sophisticated surveillance that they never suspected existed. The charity gala was now just 1 week away, and I'd gathered enough evidence to destroy both their reputations and their carefully planned future. But more importantly, I'd used the investigation process to remember exactly who I'd been before I'd learned to make myself invisible. The woman who'd built Carter Digital Security wasn't just capable of exposing their deception, she was capable of building something better from the wreckage of their betrayal. Mark and Vanessa had underestimated me completely, but their mistake was about to become the foundation for my renaissance. They thought they were dealing with a woman whose world would collapse when her marriage ended. Instead, they were about to discover that ending my marriage was the first step toward reclaiming a life that had been temporarily obscured, but never actually destroyed. The investigation was complete. The documentation was comprehensive. The surveillance network was operational. All that remained was choosing the perfect moment to reveal everything I'd learned and everything I'd become while they'd been busy congratulating themselves on their superior intelligence. That moment would come at the charity gala, where Mark expected to celebrate his promotion while maintaining the facade of his perfect marriage. Instead, it would become the venue where both he and Vanessa learned the consequences of betraying someone whose professional expertise included exposing exactly the kind of secrets they'd thought they were clever enough to hide. The strategy session began at 7 a.m. in my home office, with 3 cups of coffee and a conference call that would have impressed the most sophisticated corporate security teams. Rachel Thompson had arrived before dawn, bringing her expertise in surveillance and investigation, along with a selection of recording equipment that would make our evening's work possible. David Kim, the attorney I'd retained for what he understood to be a complex divorce case involving financial fraud, joined us via secure video connection from his downtown Los Angeles office. "The evidence you've collected is beyond comprehensive," David said, reviewing the digital files I'd compiled over the past 2 weeks. "We have documentation of systematic financial deception, proof of asset concealment, evidence of marital resource misappropriation, and a clear timeline showing premeditated planning to dissolve the marriage under fraudulent circumstances." Rachel spread photographs across my desk, surveillance images she'd captured over the past week, showing Mark and Vanessa at various locations around Riverside and neighboring cities. They've been remarkably careless for 2 people supposedly conducting a secret affair. Multiple public appearances, consistent behavioral patterns, predictable schedule coordination. It's almost like they wanted to be discovered. Or like they're so confident in their superiority that they've stopped considering potential consequences, I added, reviewing the timeline we'd constructed for the evening's operation. Mark has always underestimated everyone around him, but especially women. He thinks strategic thinking is a masculine trait. The charity gala would begin at 7 that evening at the Riverside Country Club, with cocktails followed by dinner and a program recognizing outstanding achievements in the local business community. Mark was scheduled to receive recognition for his sales performance and would likely be announced as the new district manager, the promotion he'd been pursuing for 2 years. Vanessa would be present as part of the support staff, helping coordinate the evening's logistics while maintaining the appearance of professional detachment from the man she'd been planning to build a life with. Our strategy required precision, timing, and careful coordination to achieve maximum impact while ensuring legal compliance. The goal wasn't just to expose their affair, but to demonstrate the full scope of their deception and the calculated nature of their betrayal. Mark and Vanessa had spent months planning their future together, while systematically destroying my marriage and my family's financial security. Their consequences needed to reflect the sophistication of their deception. The recording equipment will capture everything, Rachel explained, showing me the nearly invisible devices that would document the evening's events. Audio pickups with a 50-foot range, video cameras that integrate seamlessly with formal wear, backup recording systems, in case primary equipment fails. We'll have comprehensive documentation of everyone's statements and reactions. David had prepared legal documentation that would be served immediately following the public confrontation. Divorce papers with detailed asset protection provisions, restraining orders, preventing further financial manipulation, emergency injunctions, freezing all joint accounts pending court review. The moment you decide to proceed, Mark's access to marital resources ends permanently. The most crucial element of our strategy was the information that Mark and Vanessa didn't know I possessed. While they'd been focused on concealing their romantic relationship, they'd failed to consider that their professional communications and financial activities created a digital trail accessible to someone with my technical expertise. They had no idea that I'd been monitoring their real-time communications, documenting their future planning, or tracking their financial coordination. They think tonight is their celebration, I said, reviewing the guest list for the charity gala. Mark gets his promotion, Vanessa gets to play the supportive colleague, and they both get to maintain their facade while continuing to plan their eventual life together. They have no concept that anyone is capable of exposing them. The psychological preparation was as important as the technical preparation. For months, I'd been playing the role of the accommodating wife who trusted her husband's explanations and supported his professional advancement without question. Tonight, I would need to maintain that performance until the precise moment when revelation would achieve maximum impact. The transformation from submissive spouse to strategic adversary had to occur dramatically enough to shatter everyone's assumptions about who Jessica Carter really was. "Are you prepared for the immediate aftermath?" David asked, his legal experience having taught him that public confrontations rarely proceeded as planned. Mark's going to be shocked and potentially volatile. Vanessa's going to be humiliated and possibly vindictive. The professional consequences for both of them will be immediate and severe. I thought about Emma, safely spending the night with my sister in San Diego, unaware that her family's structure was about to change forever. I thought about the house on Oakwood Drive that would soon be occupied by a single mother and her daughter, rather than the nuclear family that had justified its purchase. I thought about the years I'd spent accommodating Mark's needs and supporting his ambitions while allowing my own identity to disappear into domestic invisibility. "I'm prepared for whatever comes next," I replied, "but I'm done being prepared to accept less than I deserve." The afternoon involved final preparations that felt like suiting up for battle. I selected my outfit with the same strategic consideration I'd once applied to client presentations for high-stakes cybersecurity audits. The black cocktail dress was elegant but professional, expensive enough to signal confidence, but understated enough to avoid accusations of seeking attention. The jewelry was my own, purchased with income from consulting projects that Mark had never known existed. The overall effect was sophisticated success rather than suburban domesticity. Rachel arrived at 5 to conduct final equipment checks and review our communication protocols. The recording devices were invisible but comprehensive, capable of capturing audio and video evidence that would be admissible in legal proceedings. We'd tested every component multiple times to ensure reliability under the stress of public confrontation. "Remember that this isn't just about exposing their affair," she reminded me, adjusting the nearly imperceptible camera integrated into my necklace. "You're also demonstrating your own capabilities to everyone who's underestimated you over the years. Tonight, you stop being invisible." Mark appeared in our bedroom doorway at 6:15, adjusting his tuxedo cufflinks with the satisfied confidence of a man whose biggest concern was accepting congratulations for his professional achievements. He looked handsome and successful, every inch the rising executive who deserved recognition for his accomplishments. The irony that those accomplishments had been built partially on the foundation of my unpaid domestic labor and financial subsidies seemed to escape him entirely. "You look beautiful," he said, and for a moment, his expression held an echo of genuine affection. "I'm glad you'll be there tonight to share this moment with me." Share this moment. As if my presence at his professional triumph was a generous inclusion rather than an obligation. As if my role was to witness his success rather than participate in it. As if 9 years of marriage had taught him nothing about partnership or reciprocity. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, allowing him to see exactly the expression he expected. Supportive pride tinged with admiration for his achievements. "I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished." The drive to the country club proceeded. In comfortable silence, Mark humming contentedly while reviewing his acceptance speech for the promotion announcement. He'd practiced the remarks multiple times over the past week, perfecting the balance between professional gratitude and personal humility that would reinforce his image as someone ready for increased responsibility. "I think tonight might change everything for us," he said as we pulled into the country club's circular driveway. "The promotion comes with a significant salary increase and better benefits. We'll be able to afford some of the upgrades we've been discussing for the house." We hadn't been discussing any upgrades. Mark had been discussing upgrades with Vanessa, planning improvements to whatever new home they intended to purchase together once his divorce was finalized. But he'd apparently forgotten which conversations had occurred with which woman, a carelessness that would prove revealing when those conversations were played back for public examination. The Riverside Country Club had been transformed into an elegant venue for the evening's celebration, with soft lighting and floral arrangements that created an atmosphere of refined success. The guest list included the most prominent business leaders from throughout Southern California's Inland Empire, along with their spouses and selected staff members from participating companies. Mark moved through the cocktail reception with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and making connections that would serve his professional advancement. Vanessa was stationed near the registration table, officially responsible for coordinating guest services, but actually positioned to maintain visual contact with Mark throughout the evening. She wore a navy blue dress that flattered her figure while remaining appropriately professional. Her blonde hair styled in an updo that showcased the diamond earrings I now knew Mark had purchased for her using our joint credit card. "Jessica, you look lovely tonight," she said when I approached her station. Her smile warm with the kind of sympathy reserved for women whose husbands required professional support to maintain their success. "Mark mentioned you've been so helpful with his preparation for tonight's recognition." So helpful. The phrase was perfectly calibrated to sound complimentary while actually dismissing my contributions as peripheral assistance rather than substantial. Partnership. Vanessa had mastered the art of appearing supportive, while subtly reinforcing hierarchies that positioned her as the professional equal, and me as the domestic accessory. "Mark's success has always been a team effort," I replied, matching her tone of gracious collegiality, though I'm sure his colleagues at Premier Auto Group deserve most of the credit for his achievements. Her expression flickered slightly, uncertainty about whether my comment contained hidden meaning. But the moment passed quickly as other guests required her attention, and I moved deeper into the reception area where Mark was holding court with a group of senior executives from his company. "This is my wife, Jessica," he said, introducing me to a circle that included his immediate supervisor and 2 regional managers I'd met at previous company events. "She's been incredibly supportive throughout this whole promotion process." Supportive. Another perfectly dismissive term that acknowledged my existence while minimizing my significance. I was the woman who provided emotional support for Mark's professional endeavors, the domestic foundation that enabled his corporate success, the understanding wife who never demanded attention or recognition for her own contributions. "Actually, we've met before," said Linda Foster, the regional vice president who would be announcing Mark's promotion later in the evening. "At the spring barbecue at your home, you mentioned some interesting work you'd done in cybersecurity. Consulting." The comment created a moment of visible tension as Mark's expression tightened slightly. He'd forgotten that Linda had shown genuine interest in my professional background during a casual conversation at our house 6 months ago, and he clearly didn't want that topic explored further in the current context. Jessica stepped back from consulting work to focus on family responsibilities, he said quickly, his tone suggesting that my professional interests were a closed chapter rather than a continuing capability. "She's found much more satisfaction in domestic projects." Domestic projects. The phrase landed like a physical blow, reducing years of expertise and professional achievement to the equivalent of home improvement hobbies. Mark had just dismissed my entire career in front of his colleagues, defining me publicly as someone whose greatest accomplishments involved household management and child rearing. "That's interesting," Linda replied, her tone suggesting she remembered our conversation differently. "I got the impression that cybersecurity was more than a casual interest for you." "It was a different phase of my life," I said, maintaining the gracious composure that Mark expected while internally cataloging his public dismissal as additional evidence of his disrespect. Though the skills remain relevant in unexpected ways. The conversation moved on to safer topics about the evening's program and the recognition Mark would receive, but I could see Linda filing away the interaction for future consideration. She was sharp enough to recognize the dynamics at play, and experienced enough in corporate environments to understand the implications of systematic professional dismissal. Dinner proceeded with the usual mixture of business networking and social conversation, punctuated by speeches recognizing various community achievements and corporate contributions. Mark grew increasingly animated as the evening progressed toward his moment of recognition, confident that his promotion announcement would solidify his status among the region's business leadership. Vanessa moved efficiently through the dining room, ostensibly managing logistical details but actually maintaining constant awareness of Mark's location and mood. Their eye contact was minimal but meaningful, brief exchanges that reinforced their connection while maintaining the appearance of purely professional interaction. They'd clearly practiced this performance during previous company events, perfecting the art of public coordination while concealing private intimacy. The moment of truth arrived as Linda Foster approached the podium to announce the evening's final recognition. Mark straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie one final time as he prepared to accept the promotion he'd been pursuing for years. Around our table, colleagues and their spouses prepared to offer congratulations for an achievement that represented the culmination of sustained professional effort. "Before we announce our final recognition of the evening," Linda began, her voice carrying clearly through the dining room's sophisticated sound system, "I'd like to acknowledge the support systems that make professional success possible. Behind every achievement in business, there are family members and colleagues whose contributions often go unrecognized." Mark smiled broadly, assuming that Linda's comments were building toward recognition of his own achievements. He had no idea that her words were actually creating the perfect setup for what would happen next. "Tonight, we're recognizing not just professional accomplishments, But the importance of integrity and honesty in all our business relationships, Linda continued. Success that's built on deception ultimately serves no one's interests. I felt the recording equipment activate automatically, responsive to programmed audio cues that Rachel had installed earlier in the day. Every word spoken from this moment forward would be captured and preserved, creating a permanent record of the evening's revelations and their immediate consequences. Mark's expression began to shift as Linda's comments took an unexpected direction, but he remained confident that the evening would conclude with his professional triumph. Vanessa had gone completely still near the service station where she'd been pretending to coordinate with catering staff, her attention focused entirely on Linda's remarks. "Which brings me to tonight's final presentation," Linda said, her gaze moving deliberately around the dining room before settling on our table. "And recognition that I believe will surprise many of you, because it involves someone whose achievements have been systematically undervalued by people who should have known better." The recording equipment captured everything that followed with perfect clarity, preserving for legal and personal history the moment when Mark and Vanessa learned the consequences of underestimating someone whose professional capabilities included exposing exactly the kind of secrets they'd thought they were clever enough to hide. The woman who'd been dismissed as helpful and supportive was about to remind everyone in the room exactly who Jessica Carter had been before she'd learned to make herself invisible, and who she intended to be now that she'd remembered her own power. The silence in the dining room was absolute as Linda Foster's words hung in the air like a challenge. Mark's confident smile had frozen into something resembling confusion, while Vanessa's carefully maintained composure showed the first hairline cracks of genuine alarm. Neither of them understood yet that Linda's unexpected speech direction was about to become the foundation for their complete professional and personal destruction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Linda continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and making decisions that affected hundreds of careers. "I want to tell you about someone whose achievements have been hiding in plain sight. Someone whose expertise has been consistently undervalued, whose contributions have been systematically minimized, and whose capabilities have been deliberately obscured by people who should have been celebrating her success." I remained perfectly still, maintaining the composed expression of a supportive wife attending her husband's professional triumph, even as I felt the familiar surge of focus that had once characterized my approach to complex cybersecurity challenges. The recording equipment was capturing every word, every facial expression, every moment of the revelation that was about to unfold. 6 years ago, our company faced a devastating cyber attack that threatened to compromise our entire customer database and financial systems, Linda said, her gaze moving deliberately around the room. We'd exhausted our resources with conventional security consultants, and the attack was escalating beyond our ability to contain it. That's when we contacted Carter Digital Security and met the specialist who would save our company from bankruptcy. Mark's face had gone completely pale, his confident posture dissolving into something approaching panic as he began to understand the direction of Linda's remarks. Vanessa had abandoned any pretense of professional duties and was staring directly at our table, her expression cycling through disbelief, horror, and calculation as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. Jessica Carter didn't just stop the attack, Linda continued, her voice warming with genuine admiration. She traced it to its source, documented the perpetrator's methods, recovered our compromised data, and implemented security protocols that have protected us from similar threats ever since. Her work saved Premier Auto Group over $2 million in potential losses and established cybersecurity procedures that have become the industry standard for automotive dealerships throughout California. The murmur that rippled through the dining room was audible proof that this information was news to most of the attendees, including colleagues who'd worked with Mark for years without ever understanding his wife's professional background. I could see recognition dawning on faces throughout the room as people remembered conversations where Mark had dismissed my work as simple computer consulting or hobby-level technical support. "What makes Jessica's achievement even more remarkable," Linda said, her tone becoming sharper with what I now recognized as controlled anger, is that she accomplished all of this while being systematically diminished by people who should have been proud to be associated with her success. Instead of celebrating her expertise, certain individuals have spent years convincing her that her accomplishments were insignificant, that her professional identity was less important than her domestic obligations, that her capabilities were somehow incompatible with being a supportive wife and mother. Mark had stopped trying to maintain his composed expression entirely. His face displayed the kind of raw shock reserved for people whose fundamental assumptions about reality had just been shattered. He'd built his entire relationship strategy on the belief that I was financially dependent and professionally irrelevant, that my world revolved entirely around supporting his success, that I lacked the resources or connections to challenge whatever decisions he made about our future. "Tonight, I want to correct that misimpression," Linda said, her voice carrying across the silent dining room with the authority of someone delivering a verdict. "Jessica Carter is one of the most accomplished cybersecurity specialists in Southern California, a business owner whose expertise has protected dozens of companies from devastating financial losses, and a professional whose capabilities extend far beyond anything most people in this room have ever imagined." The applause that followed was polite but confused, as guests tried to process the disconnect between Linda's description and their own assumptions about who I was supposed to be. Mark's colleagues were visibly struggling to reconcile their understanding of me as the quiet, supportive wife with this new information about professional achievements that none of them had ever heard mentioned. "But tonight's recognition isn't just about professional accomplishments," Linda continued, and I felt my pulse accelerate as she moved toward the section of her remarks that would change everything. "It's also about the importance of honesty and integrity in all our relationships, both personal and professional. It's about the consequences that await people who think they're clever enough to deceive someone whose professional expertise includes uncovering exactly the kind of secrets they believe they're smart enough to hide." Mark's breathing had become visibly labored, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of someone approaching panic. Vanessa had gone completely motionless, frozen in place like an animal that had suddenly realized it was being hunted by a predator it hadn't known existed. "Over the past several weeks," Linda said, her tone becoming clinical with the precision of someone presenting evidence, "I've had the opportunity to review comprehensive documentation of systematic deception, financial fraud, and professional misconduct involving members of our own organization. The evidence has been compiled by someone whose investigative capabilities far exceed anything our internal security department could have managed." I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the dining room focus on me as I rose from my chair with the deliberate grace of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. The recording equipment was capturing every second of Mark and Vanessa's disintegration as they began to understand the scope of what they were facing. "Mark Carter," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the dining room's perfect acoustics, "for the past 4 months, you've been conducting an affair with Vanessa Mills while systematically stealing money from our joint accounts to fund your romantic activities. You've diverted over $8,000 from our family's savings to pay for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and jewelry for your lover, all while lying to me about working late and attending client meetings." The silence that followed my statement was broken only by the sound of chairs shifting as guests turned to stare at Mark, whose face had progressed from pale to gray as he processed the specificity of my accusations. Vanessa made a small sound that might have been a whimper, her carefully constructed professional image crumbling as she realized that everyone in the room was now staring at her. "But the financial theft was only the beginning," I continued, pulling out the tablet that contained the evidence I'd been compiling for weeks. "You've also been planning to divorce me strategically, timing the dissolution of our marriage to coincide with your promotion so that your increased income would minimize your support obligations. You've been working with Vanessa to establish a joint financial account and plan a new domestic arrangement that explicitly excludes our daughter and me from consideration." Mark finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Jessica, this isn't the place for this conversation. We should discuss this privately. Privately? I asked, allowing genuine amusement to color my tone. Like, the private hotel rooms you've been paying for with our family's money? Like the private dinners you've been enjoying while lying to me about working late? Like the private planning sessions where you and Vanessa have been designing your future together while I've been taking care of our daughter and managing our household? The guests had given up any pretense of polite discretion and were openly staring at the drama unfolding at our table. Several people had their phones out, undoubtedly recording what would become the most talked-about charity gala in Riverside's social history. The evidence is comprehensive, I said, activating the tablet's presentation mode so that the large screens around the dining room displayed the financial records I'd compiled. Credit card statements showing hotel charges on dates when Mark claimed to be working late. GPS tracking data from his company car showing repeated visits to the Marriott Hotel during supposed client meetings. Email correspondence between Mark and Vanessa discussing their plans to start a new life together once his divorce was finalized. The screens filled with images that told the story of their affair in devastating detail. Photos of Mark and Vanessa entering hotels together. Timestamp data proving that Mark had been lying about his whereabouts. Financial records showing the systematic theft of marital assets for romantic purposes. But perhaps most revealing, I said, advancing to the next section of evidence, are the private messages between Mark and Vanessa discussing their assessment of my capabilities and their strategies for managing my response to their eventual betrayal. The screens now displayed their own words, text messages and emails where they'd discussed me in terms that ranged from dismissive to contemptuous. Mark describing me as completely clueless about business matters and too focused on domestic responsibilities to notice financial irregularities. Vanessa referring to me as the typical suburban housewife who wouldn't know how to protect herself legally, and someone whose entire world revolves around keeping her husband happy. They were so confident in their superior intelligence, I said, allowing my voice to carry the satisfaction of someone whose patience had been rewarded with complete vindication, that they documented their entire conspiracy electronically, creating a digital trail that anyone with basic cybersecurity training could follow and preserve for legal proceedings. Mark had slumped in his chair as if physically deflated, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose entire life strategy had just collapsed. Vanessa remained frozen near the service station, tears streaming down, her face as she realized that her carefully planned future had just evaporated in front of the region's business leadership. The promotion you were expecting tonight, Mark, I continued, has been withdrawn pending a full investigation into your misuse of company resources and violation of professional ethics standards. The joint account you and Vanessa established, using stolen marital funds, has been frozen by court order. The attorneys you consulted about divorce strategy have been provided with evidence of your financial fraud and will be withdrawing from representation due to ethical conflicts. Linda Foster returned to the podium, her expression showing the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from witnessing justice delivered with surgical precision. Premier Auto Group has zero tolerance for employees who violate trust relationships, whether with clients, colleagues, or family members. Effective immediately, both Mark Carter and Vanessa Mills are suspended pending completion of our internal investigation and any legal proceedings that may follow. The impact of Linda's announcement rippled through the dining room as guests realized they were witnessing not just a personal confrontation, but a professional catastrophe that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Mark's career advancement had just become career destruction, and Vanessa's ambitions for financial security had transformed into professional humiliation and potential legal liability. But this evening isn't just about exposing deception, I said, returning the focus to the larger narrative that would define how this moment was remembered. It's also about reclaiming an identity that I allowed to be systematically diminished over years of accommodating someone else's ego and supporting someone else's success at the expense of my own professional development. I activated the final section of my presentation, revealing the documentation of Carter Digital Security's reactivation and the contracts I'd already secured for major cybersecurity consulting projects with companies throughout Southern California. While Mark and Vanessa were planning their romantic future, I was rebuilding the professional network and technical capabilities that they'd forgotten I possessed. Carter Digital Security is once again an active consulting firm, specializing in digital forensics and corporate security investigations. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, recognition from business leaders who understood the significance of what they'd witnessed. A woman had just exposed systematic betrayal using exactly the professional skills that her betrayers had dismissed as irrelevant, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything they'd imagined possible. The lesson here, I said as the applause subsided, is simple but important. Underestimating people based on the roles they choose to play is a dangerous mistake. The woman who appears to be focused entirely on domestic responsibilities might actually be someone whose professional expertise makes her uniquely qualified to expose exactly the kind of secrets you think you're clever enough to hide. Mark finally stood, his movements unsteady as he attempted to salvage some dignity from the complete destruction of his carefully constructed life. Jessica, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the full situation. Vanessa and we never meant for things to develop the way they did. It just happened. It just happened? I asked, genuine curiosity coloring my tone. The hotel reservations just happened? The joint bank account just happened? The strategic planning for divorce proceedings just happened? The systematic theft of our family's financial resources just happened? Vanessa finally moved, abandoning her position near the service station to approach our table with the desperate urgency of someone whose entire future had just disappeared. Jessica, please, you have to understand that Mark wasn't happy in your marriage. He needed someone who could appreciate his success, someone who understood his professional ambitions. Someone who understood his professional ambitions, I repeated, allowing the irony to settle over the dining room. You mean someone who was impressed by achievements that were partially subsidized by his wife's undisclosed income and enabled by his wife's unpaid domestic labor? Someone who didn't realize that his success was built on a foundation of support that he'd been systematically taking for granted. The truth of that statement was visible in the faces around the dining room. As guests processed the implications of what they'd learned, Mark's professional accomplishments suddenly looked different when viewed through the lens of spousal support that had been deliberately concealed and minimized. The marriage is over, I said, stating the obvious conclusion to an evening that had eliminated any possibility of reconciliation. The affair is exposed. Your careers are destroyed. Your romantic planning has become evidence in fraud proceedings. The question now is whether you'll face the consequences with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you'll continue the pattern of deception that brought you to this moment. David Kim appeared at my elbow, materializing from the crowd of stunned guests with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for precisely this moment. Mrs. Carter, he said formally, the legal documents are ready for service whenever you're prepared to proceed. I accepted the papers he handed me with the satisfaction of someone whose careful planning had achieved exactly its intended result. Mark Carter, I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just reclaimed complete control over her own life. You're being served with divorce papers, asset protection orders, and formal notification of fraud charges that will be filed with the district attorney's office first thing Monday morning. The serving of legal papers at a charity gala was unprecedented in Riverside's social history, creating a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. But more than theatrical impact, it represented the culmination of a strategic campaign that had transformed personal betrayal into professional vindication and systematic deception into comprehensive justice. Mark accepted the papers with hands that shook visibly, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose entire life strategy had just collapsed beyond any possibility of recovery. Vanessa remained frozen in place, tears streaming down her face as she processed the reality that her carefully planned future had just evaporated in the most public way possible. The evidence will be provided to Premier Auto Group's Human Resources Department for their internal investigation, I continued, ensuring that the professional consequences would be as thorough as the personal ones. Copies will also be forwarded to the California Department of Consumer Affairs for review of potential ethics violations involving financial planning services. Linda Foster returned to the podium one final time, her expression showing the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from witnessing justice delivered with elegant precision. "This concludes tonight's formal program," she said, her voice carrying across a dining room that had been transformed from elegant networking venue into courtroom for delivering verdicts. "I think we've all learned something important about the dangers of underestimating people whose capabilities extend far beyond their apparent roles." As guests began to disperse, many approached me with expressions of admiration and offers of future business collaboration. The professional network that I'd allowed to atrophy during years of domestic focus was rebuilding itself in real time, powered by recognition of capabilities that had been demonstrated rather than merely described. 3 months later, I sat in the corner office of Carter Digital Security's new headquarters in downtown Riverside, reviewing contracts for cybersecurity consulting projects that would generate more income than Mark's automotive sales position had ever provided. Emma had adapted to our new life with the resilience that children display when their stability improves rather than deteriorates, thriving in an environment where her mother's professional achievements were celebrated rather than hidden. Mark and Vanessa's affair had ended exactly as it deserved to end, with professional destruction and personal humiliation that reflected the calculated nature of their betrayal. Mark was working as a sales associate at a small dealership 40 miles away, his career advancement permanently derailed by the fraud charges and ethics violations that followed our divorce. Vanessa had left Riverside entirely, abandoning her ambitions for financial security through romantic manipulation in favor of starting over somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. The lesson had been delivered with the kind of precision that comes from understanding exactly how to expose secrets that people think they're clever enough to hide. The woman who'd been dismissed as just a housewife had reminded everyone involved that underestimating people is a dangerous game to play, especially when your targets possess professional capabilities that you've forgotten exist. Justice had been served with elegant efficiency, and the woman who'd learned to make herself invisible had reclaimed her power in the most public way possible. The marriage was over, but the life that emerged from its wreckage was infinitely more authentic than what had been destroyed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.